criminals. So I'm not going to let the military be taken advantage of. I have no choice. Do I want that to happen? Absolutely not. But you're dealing with rough people.
Again, I want to be careful about the numbers. We don't know where the president got his numbers from, but we do know the people who are applying for asylum are often young children, mothers, people fleeing violence. So my question is this to you, Patty, and I'll give you a quick response after that. Does the president really want troops to make the call of using force in such a chaotic scenario, or is this a tactic to once again make the border crisis seem more dire?
Again, this is part of President Trump's MO to demonize immigrants, to demonize people of color.
These aren't immigrants.
We already have Border Patrol at the border. We have National Guard at the border. There is no need for U.S. troops to be there and be given the authority to shoot at will. That is part of his, again, fear-mongering tactics that, frankly, Steve, did not work very well in the midterm elections. You know, he used it right before the midterm elections, and he lost the House, and he lost several governorships, and he lost several statehoodships, and he did not win as many Senate seats as he thought he was going to win using these tactics.
Right.
Steve, quickly, your response?
He lost the House. He lost the House just as President Obama did, President Clinton did. So I'm not shocked at that. His number, by the way, Anna, of 500 is directly from Homeland Security, who says there are at least 500 known dangerous gang criminal members of the caravans. That's where he got that number. But look, here's, I think, the important point. It's totally improper, Patty, for you to conflate immigrants with illegal immigrants, because they have nothing to do with the other. Legal immigrants to this country are a treasure to this nation, particularly for those of us who are Hispanic. Illegal immigration is a scourge upon this country, and people saying that they can show up on their own, waving a foreign flag, and demand entry into our country and hop the line and cheat the system.
Legal asylum, Steve. They're not they're seeking legal asylum.
Has become a backdoor. It has become a backdoor way to get in the United States. A decade ago, there were 5,000 asylum seekers. Now there's almost 100,000 per year in the United States. It's clearly a way that people have used, unfortunately, a lot of them coached by American leftists, quite frankly, to try to game our system rather than seek legal immigration, which, again, we love.
Thank you both. I appreciate the spirited discussion. Good to see you. Thank you for being here, Steve Cortes and Patty Solis Doyle. All right. Also breaking this afternoon, Happy Think Probe, an associate of the president's friend and longtime advisor Roger Stone, is in, quote, plea negotiations with special counsel Robert Mueller. Now, Jerome Corsi is his name. He's a well-known conspiracy theorist, and his role in this investigation largely revolves around the possibility he may have been an intermediary between Stone and WikiLeaks, the site that released the hacked emails of the DNC and Clinton campaign chairman John Podesta in the lead-up to the 2016 election. Now, during a radio interview, Roger Stone was on the defense, and he said there's no way he could be incriminated as a result of this deal with Corsi.
This idea that Jerry Corsi could implicate me, there's simply no evidence whatsoever that would show that I knew about the source or the content of any allegedly stolen emails or any allegedly hacked emails that were published by WikiLeaks. Just not so.
Stone also said Corsi is under a tremendous amount of pressure and that he is being asked over and over to say things he does not actually believe occurred. Meantime, disgraced former Trump campaign aide George Papadopoulos is learning the hard way. Robert Mueller's keeping an eye on his Twitter feed. In 2 days, on Monday, Papadopoulos is set to begin serving a 14-day prison sentence as part of his plea deal that he struck after lying to the FBI in connection with the Russia probe. His lawyers want that sentence postponed, but the special counsel is at this point saying no way, noting in court documents that Papadopoulos' initial statement of remorse doesn't exactly line up with what he is now saying publicly. And that includes a tweet in which Papadopoulos declares the FBI's investigation is, quote, the biggest case of entrapment. And another tweet in which he says he was considering withdrawing his guilty plea because he believed he was framed. Joining us now to discuss, defense attorney Randy Zellin. Randy, if Mueller is reading Papadopoulos' tweets, he must be reading the president's. What message does that send?
Where to begin? These people have such a curious relationship to the truth. You have Mr. Papadopoulos saying, I lied. Now I lied about lying. So do they cancel each other out? That means I've told the truth. You've got Dr. Corsi, who basically is more or less, it sounds like, admitting that he lied when he went in and met with the special counsel and testified
because he was
in the
saying he was
grand jury.
Expecting an indictment.
Exactly. And now you have, I think, Mr. Stone, the old doth protest too much. And, oh, by the way, this guy is under a tremendous amount of pressure. So he must be lying that he lied. It really is. It's fascinating.
Like you said, where do you begin? So let's just talk about those tweets for a moment. Do you think the president should be worried if he's seeing what's happening in the Papadopoulos situation?
I don't know that the president is necessarily capable of worrying. Right now, if I were Mr. Papadopoulos, I don't think he understands that just because he's been sentenced, that he is insulated and can only be looking at 14 days, because based upon those tweets, he has admitted to having committed perjury, because when he went before the judge and entered a plea of guilty, he was sworn under oath. And the judge, I can assure you, said, Mr. Papadopoulos, think carefully, because anything you say from this point forward, if you're lying, you will go to jail for perjury. Those tweets are an admission that he lied to the judge when he admitted lying to the FBI.
So you're saying he could actually be in deeper trouble than he was to begin with?
He could be in a whole world of hurt. And if I were him right now, I would make a motion for a stay of my surrender date, because he's got one argument, which is wait for Andrew Miller to go to all the courts to say that the special counsel has no business being there. It's unconstitutional. Therefore, my investigation, my prosecution was unconstitutional, and let me go home.
Right. That's another case. I don't want our viewers to be confused. Andrew Miller's another person who has been subpoenaed to testify, who is now fighting that because he says that he believes Robert Mueller's appointment was unconstitutional, or his investigation is
and should all go out the window.
Let me talk about Corsi, who we just talked about, a Roger Stone associate, who now is talking about having a plea deal or in negotiations. If he's in negotiations right now, does that mean he's kind of already given up the goods to them, or that he's willing to give up the goods as long as he gets a good deal?
The federal government works like this. You want to rent a car. The government walks in and says, I'm going to drive your car. I'm going to put a few thousand miles on it. And if I like it, I'll pay you. That's the way that it works. So, no, you don't dictate to the government. What happens is you come in to the government, you sit in a conference room with your lawyer and the prosecutors and the agents. You get a piece of paper that says that you will not get in trouble for the words that come out of your mouth so long as you tell us the truth. And the government tests you, and you audition for the government. That's what we call a proffer. And that hopefully will lead you to a cooperation agreement. But the government makes no commitments until they're satisfied that they're happy with what you have to say. So Dr. Corsi, if he's looking for a cooperation agreement, and why? He wants a better sentence.
Right.
He wants the government to go to the judge and say, don't worry about the sentencing guidelines.
But the government has to think that he has something that is going to be beneficial to them in their investigation,
yes,
right?
The key is substantial assistance. And before the government determines if you can provide substantial assistance, they want to hear everything you have to say.
Okay.
Not only about other people, but they want to know that they can trust you. So you've got to implicate yourself, which means your own case is over.
Oh, my goodness. This investigation gets more complicated with more characters all the time, but that's why we keep on hitting it week after week, because we want to keep you informed with each step. Now, the policy, which the president first tweeted about in July of last year, has so far been blocked by district courts across the country, and now the administration wants to leapfrog federal appeals courts and go right to the Supreme Court in hopes of getting a decision before the current term ends in June. The filing comes after the president and Chief Justice John Roberts got into a very public dispute this week about the independence of the judiciary. Roberts taking the president to task for claiming that a recent ruling against the Trump administration was a disgrace from a, quote, Obama judge. And as rare as it may be for a Supreme Court justice to comment on a president's behavior, what isn't rare is this president lashing out at judges and the judicial system when things don't go his way.
The courts are not helping us, I have to be honest with you. It's ridiculous. Somebody said I should not criticize judges. Okay, I'll criticize judges. I have had ruling after ruling after ruling that's been bad rulings, okay? I've been treated very unfairly. A really big problem with the court system. It's a bad system, let me tell you. And I listen to these judges talk and talk and talk. So unfair. People are screaming, break up the Ninth Circuit. And I'll tell you what, that Ninth Circuit, you have to see, take a look at how many times they have been overturned with their terrible decisions. Take a look. It's really sad when every single case filed against us is in the Ninth Circuit. We lose, and then we do fine in the Supreme Court. What does that tell you about our court system? It's a very, very sad thing.
Let's discuss now with CNN Supreme Court analyst Joan Biskupic. So, Joan, as we just saw, the president has been attacking judges and courts for quite some time, and yet here was the comment that prompted the rebuke from Roberts. Let's watch.
Well, you go to the Ninth Circuit, and it's a disgrace, and I'm going to put in a major complaint. This was an Obama judge, and I'll tell you what, it's not going to happen like this anymore.
Roberts responded with, we do not have Obama judges or Trump judges, Bush judges or Clinton judges. What we have is an extraordinary group of dedicated judges doing their level best to do equal right to those appearing before them. That independent judiciary is something we should all be thankful for. Joan, it's widely noted who appoints a judge, if it's a Republican or a Democrat. So is what Trump said any different?
There is a distinction, Anna. Republican presidents tend to appoint judges who will narrowly interpret the Constitution and who want elected legislators to solve society's problems. Democratic presidents tend to appoint judges who expansively read the Constitution and federal law. They have more liberal, progressive views of the Constitution as an evolving document. So there are ideological differences that the two sets of nominees often have. I mean, that's a given. And that's why we will often cite who the appointing president was, because it's relevant. What Donald Trump is talking about is something different. It's much more in a purely political context and an automatic context. He's essentially saying to the American public and to the judiciary that I expect automatically that judges appointed by President Obama, President Clinton, Democrats would automatically rule against him. And conversely, which is worrying, that judges appointed by President Trump, maybe President George W. Bush, would automatically rule for him. He's saying it's essentially a done deal and suggesting a certain kind of beholden nature of a jurist who's appointed. And what Chief Justice John Roberts is saying, first of all, John Roberts would like to counter both of those messages, but what really concerns him is the latter from President Trump, that whoever is appointed by him will automatically favor the administration and vice versa for a Democratic appointee.
And in fact, we've seen that has not always been the case with his own appointees who have in recent days ruled against him in a couple of cases. But Republican Senator Chuck Grassley tweeted this. Chief Justice Roberts rebuked Trump for a comment he made about judge's decision on asylum. I don't recall the chief attacking Obama when that president rebuked Alito during a State of the Union. He's referencing President Obama's rebuke of a Supreme Court ruling during his 2010 State of the Union address. At that time, many called Obama's rebuke unprecedented. Justice Alito appearing to respond with an equally unprecedented move, mouthing the words as we're showing in the video, not true. Are those two situations, what happened in 2010 with what's happening now with Trump, comparable?
No, they're not. And there are actually two little fact problems with that tweet from Senator Grassley. One is that President Obama actually did not rebuke Samuel Alito at the time. What happened was this was just a couple days after the justices had ruled 5-4 along ideological lines to rein in campaign finance regulations on corporations and labor unions. And President Obama, during his State of the Union, was complaining about that. He characterized most of the decision accurately, but then he went a little too far. And as he said something that was frankly wrong about foreign money coming into the U.S., Samuel Alito started mouthing, not true. Now, the president at the time did not rebuke Samuel Alito. It's just that Samuel Alito got a lot of criticism for that comment. And about 8-9 weeks later, the Chief Justice was at the University of Alabama and asked about that setting. And he actually did criticize the setting. He said that there they were, as President Obama got to have his lectern up there speaking out against the justices right in front of them with everybody cheering. He felt like they were at a pep rally, and he didn't like it. So contrary to what Senator Grassley said, he did criticize President Obama at that moment.
All right, Joan Biskupic, you're such a wealth of knowledge. I'm so glad to have you on the show. Thank you.
Thanks, Anna.
President Trump's hinting he may finally go visit troops in a war zone. So what's kept him from doing it up until this point? We'll discuss. You're live in the CNN newsroom. Go to certain places saying, quote, the president's the commander-in-chief and he decides where he needs to go. There are times I don't want him in certain locations, to be frank with you, for his security and the troops' security. So don't worry about that. Joining me now, retired Lieutenant General Mark Hertling, former Army Commanding General, Europe and the 7th Army, and a CNN military analyst. General, always good to see you. You have said you're fine with the fact that the president has not yet visited a war zone. Why?
I'm fine with it now, Anna, and good afternoon. The reason I said that is because if it takes this amount of pressure to go, it's probably not best to go in the first place. And like you said, you know, this is part of his responsibility to understand that as the commander-in-chief with that title, he is responsible for all of those serving in deployed locations and in combat zones. And it would seem that someone that's responsible for that kind of requirement would go visit. He hasn't done so yet. And it seems now that he's only reacting to pressure from the press or his opposition that's saying, gee, he hasn't been there in over 2 years. Why hasn't he yet visited? For him to go. That's not the kind of requirement that should force the president to go to a war zone. Not only that, but in all of the engagements with military forces, both on these conference calls like occurred on Thursday or several other engagements, he seems to have politicized or attempted to politicize the military, asking them questions that they know they should not answer.
Hold your thought for just a second, though, because I'd like to play some more sound from that call, and then you can continue with your assessment.
So, Colonel, how many people are you commanding right now, would you say?
10,000.
Wow. That's a lot of people. And what do you see in the region? What's going on in the region? How are they feeling about things? How are they feeling about trade? Because, you know, trade, for me, is a very big subject all over. We've been taken advantage of for many, many years by bad trade deals. We don't have any good trade deals. How are you finding things in the region, Nick?
Mr. President, from our perspective out on water, sir, we're seeing that there is an abundance of trade happening in the region.
Pat, tell me about the catapult system. So on the Gerald Ford, they don't use steam, which is the first one that I've ever heard of that doesn't use steam. And I know they have some difficulties, which I'm not happy about.
So, General, you talk about the political tone being part of these phone calls. As somebody who has spent years in combat and commanded tens of thousands of troops, what would you have liked to have heard the president say instead?
Well, those were just a few of the very many cringeworthy moments on that telephone call. What I would have liked him to ask was, what's the morale of the soldiers? How's the mission being accomplished over there? What kind of support do you want from the American people? What things should we next look at in terms of your operation? Or just making sure the soldiers and the various military forces know that their family members are being taken care of and that they are appreciated. Those are the two number one things that deployed soldiers want to hear from politicians, is they're supported and that their mission is important and they're taking care of their family members back home. To go off on all kinds of questions about readiness statures and number of soldiers and whether or not they agree or not with court decisions, or even comparing a combat mission to what's going on with the southern border and his approach to that, is just the wrong thing to bring up when you're talking about a apolitical military.
We're also hearing from Cindy McCain speaking out publicly for the first time this week since her.
I really did. It hurt the family too. everyone, and he hurt the other men that served with John, that were in prison as well. It wasn't just about John, it was all the other people. So I think that was a wrong thing to say, and I don't know if I'll ever get over it, I'll be honest. But I'm the wife. That's my prerogative. I don't have to.
General, quickly, if you will, what's your reaction?
The same as hers. I think anyone who's been captured and has served time as a prisoner of war understands the challenges associated with it. And I think every single military person that had heard him make that comment about Senator McCain, you don't have to agree with McCain's ideology. Many of us did not, but you did have to honor him for the kinds of suffering he went through over 5 years, 2 years in solitary confinement being tortured. It's incredible, and he gave a lot in service to the country, and that's what is so denigrating about what the president said about Senator McCain.
Lieutenant General Mark Hertling, thank you so much for being here. Good to see you.
Thank you, Anna.
No one knows exactly how they'd handle sudden life-altering adversity, but we can all hope that it would be something like this 2018 Top 10 CNN hero. Amanda Boxtel was an athlete, a dancer, an avid skier, but that all changed in the blink of an eye. She then turned her pain into purpose.
26 years ago, I went out skiing, and I remember I somersaulted. I landed on my back, and I knew in that instant that I was paralyzed. But I was determined to show that I wasn't going to give up so easily. I was inspired to create a program that could gift mobility to anyone that has a neurological impairment.
Go to CNNHeroes.com right now to vote for her for CNN Hero of the Year or any of your top 10 CNN heroes. We'll be right back. We'll support a new Trump administration proposal requiring asylum seekers to wait in Mexico while their U.S. applications are processed. So this could effectively end what the president has called catch and release, where some migrants are allowed to live and work in the U.S. currently while their asylum applications are pending. CNN's White House reporter Sarah Westwood is joining us now. Earlier, Sarah, this week, a judge in California blocked another administration effort to deny asylum to those who cross the border illegally. So give us some more context about what the president is trying to achieve here.
Well, Anna, the president has been focused recently both on the rise in asylum claims and on what he perceives as a lack of cooperation from Mexican leaders when it comes to helping the U.S. with its illegal immigration problem on the southern border. And this deal, if put into place, could help the president address both concerns. It comes as Trump administration officials have been pressuring Mexico to do more to stop that caravan of Central American migrants heading for the southern border that the president spent a lot of time talking about leading up to the midterms. In fact, the week before the midterm election, the president revealed an executive action that would also have made sweeping changes to asylum laws. It would have required migrants, if they wanted to apply for asylum, to present themselves at legal points of entry. It would have forbidden migrants from requesting asylum if they were apprehended attempting to cross the border illegally. But as you mentioned, a federal judge did block that attempted executive action from the president. It's something that he's been focused on and tweeting about as he spends his Thanksgiving holiday here in Florida. But if this deal that the Washington Post reported on with Mexico, this incoming Mexican government, were to be put into place, it would represent a major overhaul to the asylum system because under current law, migrants are now eligible to request asylum as soon as they are on U.S. soil. But as we saw with the president's recent attempted executive action, it's not clear that the Trump administration has the authority to do these kinds of changes without the help of Congress, Anna.
All right, Sarah Westwood, the story's not over then. Thank you. Joining us now to talk more about this and other topics, CNN presidential historian Douglas Brinkley and CNN political analyst Karen Demerjen. She's a congressional reporter for The Washington Post. Doug, have you ever seen a president try to change immigration law so profoundly and through so many different approaches?
No, never before. I mean, Donald Trump is synonymous with the border wall. That U.S.-Mexico border is what he's most known for, and he constantly wants to double and triple down on it. It's it's a way to do fear-mongering. I mean, the caravan became his decision for the midterm elections to prioritize that, to put out scare commercials. Basically now in Tijuana there is unrest. We have a humanitarian crisis, and it needs to be addressed in a humanitarian way. I think this could be good news for Trump on this asylum deal that's being announced by the Washington Post with Mexico. In a sense, it would show that his tough immigration stance is starting to, create a collaborative relationship with Mexico on it. But he just exaggerates the problems along the border more than any president before him.
Karen, is this asylum policy likely to get bipartisan support?
It depends on how it plays out. Look, the cities along the border that you're talking about are not exactly bastions of safety. There's going to be concerns about what the safety and the security of the people who are fleeing pretty unstable conditions is going to be in places along the border that have their own issues with violence. And I think that there's going to be criticism of Trump in that regard. But it depends on how well these people are treated, what the processing of the asylum claims are, if these people are actually granted asylum in the states who have legitimate claims. There's sure to be a lot of scrutiny on it. And it also depends on what the backlash is in Mexico. I mean, this is an incoming president who has yet to take office, does in a few days. Is there going to be support from the people or revolt against this sort of a policy, and what does it mean for the local economies there? So how stable this goes and how fair it is to the individuals that have been leaving or fleeing violence and poverty to try to come to the United States, that's going to be a lot of the influence a lot of the decision making among Trump's critics as to whether they're actually okay with trying to make this work.
I want to shift to a stunning new climate change report that just dropped yesterday. The administration now getting...
And doing the ostrich routine like Donald Trump's doing, so they've deviated from each other, and they kind of snuck this report in. It's not a midnight report. It's sort of a Thanksgiving time release. Everybody's eating turkey and watching football, and they've kind of brought this cataclysmic report out there, which talks about total geographical dislocation in the United States, floods in the Midwest, continued wildfires in the California and the far west, increased cyclonic and hurricane activity. It's a doomsday report, and yet here the President of the United States won't address the American people on it because he's beholden to the oil and gas industry.
He is tweeting, however, about the weather. And just before this report dropped, he wrote, "Brutal and extended cold blasts could shatter all records. Whatever happened to global warming?" But this report, it's so dire. So let's just look at some of the facts that these scientists, his own administration, have brought forward. Wildfires, they say, could burn up to 6 times more by 2050. Increased risk of diseases like Zika, dengue, dangerously high temperatures. We're talking about increases up to 9 degrees Fahrenheit or more by the end of the century. Could it force the president to address climate change, or will that fall to Congress, Karen?
It will fall to Congress. The president has seen scary statistics before. He's had the entire world telling him, do this differently, and yet we still backed out of the Paris Climate Accords. There's not enough cohesiveness, though, and unanimity of thought on Capitol Hill to actually have Congress force the president's hand on this yet, though. Every time they've tried to address climate change and other environmentally catastrophic issues, it's a debate that never even makes it to the floor anymore in the House or the Senate. And I think with a divided Congress, that's still going to be the way it is. So it depends on, are there going to be new faces on Capitol Hill that just keep hammering at this issue? Will the Democrats being in charge of the House keep forcing us to talk about the issue, even if it can't necessarily make it through the Senate? That may be likely in the next 2 years, but the Congress is going to have to figure out how to push some sort of a solution to actually take steps towards mitigating climate change ahead. And it's going to have to be really strong majorities because the president isn't inclined to be a driving force behind this at all, as we've seen.
I have to say, some of the women that I spoke to in my series of interviews with suburban women leading up to the midterm election, this is an issue that came up frequently. That was top of mind for them, this issue of climate change and the environment being something that was driving them to the polls, in large part making them want to vote largely with candidates who were trying to do something about climate change. Let me pivot to another thing we know that's happening this weekend, because the president's in Mar-a-Lago, and since he's been there, our reporting is he's been interviewing people to bring into his administration. Multiple sources telling CNN, Homeland Security Secretary Kirstjen Nielsen could be the next to go, as well as the White House Chief of Staff John Kelly. We have known these two to be the more moderate voices in this administration. Doug, what do you make of their possible departures?
That Donald Trump's going to double down on the far right, that he's going to try to get reelected with his base strategy and divide the country. He doesn't think that those two are tough enough on the border with Mexico, that he doesn't want anybody coming in, and he browbeats them for not being more martial about protection of the U.S.-Mexican border. And so it shows, I think, that you either have to be full-bore Trumpian, you've got to be 100% behind the president with a godfather-like loyalty, or if you show any deviation on an issue or two, he's willing to get rid of you. I personally think it would be tragic for General Kelly to leave, because I do think he's been offered our country a semblance of stability with the president who's deeply erratic.
Karen, your thoughts?
I think it also just goes to show that if you have fewer voices trying to temper the president from within the White House, fewer rivals potentially of the president from within his own ranks, that you're going to see these political battles kind of played out. When the critics of the president are going to be on the outside of the White House, there will be more of this back and forth through the media. There will be far more of an acrimonious relationship with Trump and Capitol Hill, even though that was kind of destined to happen anyway, with Democrats in charge of the House. You are not going to have an end to the criticism of more the division of thought, I guess, around President Trump's policies. It's just going to be that we thought that there was quite a bit of that inside debate happening in open air, and now I think it's probably just going to be that much more.
All right, Karen Jemurgeon, Douglas Brinkley. Good.
Government officials saying that they are basically just trying to ensure the safety of migrant children, but then some parents, however, have expressed concerns that their information may be shared with immigration authorities, and it is a valid concern since Immigration and Customs Enforcement has to process these adults. Finally, very important to note, this 14,000 number, it certainly is not a surprise for many of us who have been following these numbers because we've seen that number build. And it also is constantly changing. Maybe it's Department of Health and Human Services releasing more children to sponsors, or perhaps that they are referring more cases to HHS. So again, something that constantly develops and constantly grows. It's a number that doesn't surprise many of us now. 14,000 children at about 100 shelters throughout the United States that are run or operated by the government.
Thanks for breaking it down for us, Polo.
Thanks, Anna.
All right. President Trump is getting a taste of a new political order after the midterms. Democrats now vowing to investigate his ties to Saudi Arabia after the president indicated he's willing to side with the Crown Prince instead of his own CIA in Jamal Khashoggi's killing. Democrats will be taking a much closer look at President Trump's response to the murder of Washington Post journalist Jamal Khashoggi. Congressman Adam Schiff, who will be chairman of the House Intelligence Committee in just a few weeks, tells the Washington Post Democrats planned a, quote, deep dive on Saudi Arabia. And it would include, among other things, finding out what is in that CIA assessment of the murder, whether Trump is misrepresenting the intel, and if he is, why. The spy agency has said it is highly confident Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman ordered the murder. But President Trump has expressed doubts and defended the Saudis, saying the prince hates the crime.
I hate the crime. I hate what's done. I hate the cover-up. And I will tell you this, the Crown Prince hates it more than I do. And they have vehemently denied it. The CIA points it both ways. As I said, maybe he did, maybe he didn't. But I will say very strongly that it's a very important ally.
With me now, Max Boot. He is a senior fellow for the Council on Foreign Relations and a CNN Global Affairs analyst. The Crown Prince hates it more than I do. Max, I want your reaction to that.
I'm puzzling that out along with a lot of other things that President Trump says. It doesn't make a damn bit of sense. Another thing that he said, Anna, in that same interview was maybe the world should be held accountable because the world is a very vicious place. So, in other words, he's trying every rhetorical stratagem in the book to try to deflect blame from where it actually belongs, which is with Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, who has been judged responsible by the CIA. And President Trump is lying about what the CIA is saying they just have a feeling. He's trying to say it's not definitive. Maybe he did, maybe he didn't. Maybe the entire world is responsible, which is, the opposite of this doctrine of personal responsibility.
Let's play the clip where he blames the world.
It's a mean, nasty world out there. the Middle East in particular.
You take a look at what's going on in Iran and the vicious situation that's taking place there and the number of people that are being killed and slaughtered. You take a look all over the world. We're not going to be able to let's not deal with anybody. Maybe the world should be held accountable because the world is a vicious place. The world is a very, very vicious place. You look at what's happening in China, and you look at what's happening in so many different countries. I could name many countries. You look at what's happening with terrorism all over the world.
So first we heard from Pompeo, then the president. Clearly this is a message that they have now been wanting to drill home when we're hearing it from multiple administration officials. The world is to blame. It's a dark and vicious world, and that is to blame for Jamal Khashoggi's murder.
Yeah, they're making the world darker and more vicious by absolving the Saudis of this terrible crime, and they're engaging in moral equivalence, something that Republicans used to castigate, this notion that how can you judge anybody because everybody's guilty of something? That's exactly the moral fallacy that President Trump and Secretary Pompeo are putting out there. And it's true, yes, of course, there are human rights abuses in the world in places like Syria and China, et cetera, but that doesn't excuse what the Saudis did. And this is not business as normal to lure a journalist into your embassy in a foreign country and dismember him, especially when that journalist happens to write for an American newspaper. This is not normal. This is not something we can or should accept.
The president has been pretty transparent about his thoughts on the economic issues that are factoring into his decision, what he's saying, the relationship with Saudi Arabia. Here's what Democratic Congressman Eric Swalwell, who sits on the House Intel Committee, tweeted. He said, "I would be willing to pay a few more cents at the pump if it meant my president would condemn the butchering of a U.S. resident and journalist, Khashoggi, free press." You see those hashtags. So obviously Swalwell might be willing to pay a few more cents per gallon, but a lot of Americans might not.
Well, there's no evidence that we would be paying more per gallon at the pump if we held the Saudis responsible for what they have done. They are not selling oil as a favor to the United States. They're selling it because that's how they make money. And by the way, Saudi Arabia, it's 13% of world oil production. We produce more than they do. We don't actually need Saudi oil. We are energy independent, which is something that Donald Trump brags about all the time. So this notion that we have to overlook the Saudi crimes, otherwise the price of oil is going to skyrocket, that is just flat out false.
Let's listen to former CIA chief Leon Panetta. Here's what he said.
I think the danger here is that, the president may talk about America first, but essentially what he's saying is America is for sale to the highest bidder.
Do you agree?
I agree completely. It's not America first. It's American arms sales first. And Donald Trump is vastly exaggerating the benefits that we get from those arms sales. As we've pointed out on this network time after time, there is not actually $110 billion worth of U.S. arms that is being sold to Saudi Arabia. The actual figure is about $14 billion. And it is not creating thousands of American jobs. It is creating maybe a few hundred American jobs. And the Saudis cannot readily go to another arms buyer anyway because they are locked into American arms. Their entire military is equipped with American hardware, so they can't just go to the Chinese or Russians. So this notion that we have to sacrifice all of our principles for the price of oil or because we want to sell arms to the Saudi Arabia, it's repugnant. We don't need to do that. We are a giant economy. We don't need the Saudis. They need us far more than we need them, and we can afford to hold them accountable for this terrible crime that they have committed.
Max Boot, thanks for being here. I appreciate your perspective. Big developments in the Russia probe. An associate of Trump ally Roger Stone now confirming he is in plea negotiations with Robert Mueller's team. What this means for the investigation. Plus, James Comey fighting a subpoena from House Republicans to testify unless it's open to the public. So does he have a case? Big developments in the Russia probe. An associate of the president's friend and longtime advisor Roger Stone is in, quote, plea negotiations with special counsel Robert Mueller. Jerome Corsi is his name. He's a well-known conspiracy theorist, and his role in the investigation largely revolves around the possibility he may have been an intermediary between Stone and WikiLeaks, the site that released the hacked emails of the DNC and Clinton campaign chairman John Podesta in the lead-up to the 2016 election. During a radio interview, Roger Stone was on the defense, and he said there's no way he could be incriminated as a result of this potential Corsi deal.
This idea that Jerry Corsi could implicate me, there's simply no evidence whatsoever that would show that I knew about the source or the content of any allegedly stolen emails or any allegedly hacked emails that were published by WikiLeaks. Just not so.
Stone also said Corsi is under a tremendous amount of pressure, and he is being asked over and over to say things he doesn't actually believe occurred. Joining us now, Robert Mueller's former special assistant at the DOJ, Michael Zeldin. He's also a CNN legal analyst. Michael, happy Thanksgiving. Thanks for being here this weekend. How critical could Jerome Corsi be to this investigation into whether there was any collusion with Russia?
It depends on what he knows, Anna. What you set up is correct, that he is alleged to be an intermediary between Roger Stone and WikiLeaks, the organization that published the hacked emails. If he knows something about Roger Stone conspiring in any way with WikiLeaks, or one step back to Guccifer 2.0, the organization that Mueller accused of hacking, then he could be an important witness in this collusion aspect of the Mueller investigation. We don't know what he knows, and we don't know, therefore, when we say he's in plea negotiations, whether he's in plea negotiations with a cooperation agreement or whether he's just trying to reduce any time that he may serve because Mueller believes that he lied on multiple occasions to Mueller, and therefore he, like Papadopoulos, is trying to get a one-count plea and 14 days in jail.
When Trump lawyer Rudy Giuliani discussed Trump's written answers to Mueller, which were apparently handed over earlier this week, he spoke to Axios, which reported this. Mueller asked about the Russian hacks during the campaign that immediately followed Trump's July 27, 2016 press conference in Florida when Trump said, "Russia, if you're listening, I hope you're able to find the 30,000 Hillary Clinton emails that are missing." So we know Mueller has been circling Stone. Could Corsi essentially be the smoking gun, and the Russian hackers and WikiLeaks who were working with the Trump campaign?
Yeah, it's possible. It's very possible that there is a trio of people, Corsi, Randy Credico, another person who's alleged to be in the middle, and Stone, and maybe even if you wanted to expand it, Don Jr., because he too was in touch with WikiLeaks over the course of this run-up to the election. And if Mueller believes that the dealing with WikiLeaks, with knowledge that the contents of what WikiLeaks was distributing was stolen, violates the law, then yes, all of those people could be under his microscope of criminal activity for that conspiracy. You know, what we have seen from Mueller so far is hacking and social media indictments by Russians against Americans with notions that there were unwitting Americans involved in those schemes. This implicates the possibility that there were knowing Americans participating in the process, or Americans knowingly participating in the process. Right. I guess is the way you say that in English. That's what that's what we'll have to see.
I hear what you're saying, and again, there's still no evidence at this point that we know of that Mueller has revealed that there was a direct link to the Trump campaign. But that's why Corsi seems to be an interesting sort of piece of the puzzle potentially. Now, with the last few weeks that we have left now in power for Republicans, those on the House Judiciary Committee have fired off subpoenas now to former FBI Director James Comey and former Attorney General Loretta Lynch. And Comey tweeted this: "Happy Thanksgiving. Got a subpoena from House Republicans. I'm still happy to sit in the light and answer all questions, but I will resist a closed-door thing because I've seen enough of their selective leaking and distortion. Let's have a hearing and invite everyone to see." He wants an open hearing. Does he have a case to get his way?
Well, no. In a strict legal sense, the witness is subpoenaed, and the House determines how they want to hear that witness testimony. Now, he can resist it, and the House can then make the decision about whether to hold him in contempt, and then go to the U.S. Attorney's Office in the District of Columbia and get a contempt citation. By the time all that's done, they will no longer be the majority party in the House. So I think it behooves both parties to try to reach an accommodation if they really think that Comey has something valuable to add at this point. My personal view is that Comey has told us everything we need to know. Same with Loretta Lynch, the former Attorney General under Obama, who also has received a subpoena. I don't think there's anything new to be learned by these people, so it looks a little bit more theatrical than, tying up loose ends of a vibrant investigation. But Comey doesn't have the power to say no if the House wants to enforce it in court.
Ken Starr, the former independent counsel who investigated former President Bill Clinton, says if Mueller finds evidence of wrongdoing by President Trump, he has a couple of options. One, refer the evidence to Congress for impeachment, or, as Starr is speculating, two, wait until after Trump leaves the White House to indict him. Listen.
My own view is the president can be indicted, but that's not the Justice Department's view. So I think it then becomes then an issue for after the president leaves office in terms of the possible criminal approach.
Michael, you know Mueller. Would he just wait possibly years?
Well, it would depend on statute of limitations issues, for one. So, for example, if Mueller believed that the President of the United States committed a crime for which he should be indicted, but that indictment will not be available to him in 2 or 6 years from now because of statute of limitations problems, then he might really argue hard for the ability to indict the president now while in office, to return a sealed indictment that nobody knows about, to preserve the possibility of a post-presidency prosecution. It's hard to imagine that Mueller is going to buck the Justice Department if the Justice Department tells him that he has no case to bring against the president. But Ken Starr is correct that the president is subject to indictment once he leaves office. According to Justice Department policy, he can't be indicted while in office, and he can do what Ken Starr did, which was refer to the House and let them resolve this in a political arena.
All right, we'll see what happens. Michael Zeldin, good to see you. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Anna.
Coming up, is the Leaning Tower of Pisa now leaning a little less? What's behind an unusual correction?
In news,